Welcome back to our archives yet again, curious acolytes and students of the Force. In his lifetime, Luke Skywalker only ever really knew two Sith before he became a Jedi Knight, that being Darth Vader and Darth Sidious. Armed only with the rudimentary understanding of the dark side as given to him by Yoda, Luke learning from the dark side was very much a sink or swim situation. On his journeys to gain knowledge in his knighthood, Luke would come across many old holocrons and works by both Jedi and Sith alike that he would study extensively, in an attempt to learn as much as he could before he started up his own Jedi Academy. Luke would eventually come to find Sidious's collection of works that he had compiled over the years from the ancient Sith. In his spare time, the Emperor would often scour Jedi archives and spend a good deal of time looking into the lost records of the Sith that the Jedi had been hiding in their archives away from dark eyes. Sidious decided to compile all the surviving records into one book that he called appropriately the Book of the Sith. Within these collection of works would be the chapter as written by Darth Bane himself, the Sith that instated the rule of two and ultimately was responsible for Sidious's ascension, as well as the ultimate destruction of the Jedi Order, as well as the catalyst that would drive Luke to his own ultimate destiny. Within the margins of the pages was a never-before-seen look at what Luke Skywalker himself actually thinks of Darth Bane, as well as Bane's grand philosophy. Before we get into the meat of it, some of our librarian droids have reported to us that many of you who use our archives have not yet subscribed, so be sure to tap that subscribe button on your way out in order to get more videos on topics just like this and all Star Wars lore. Anyway, onto the topic and the holocron at hand. In his books, Bane goes over all of the nuances of his philosophy, making rather bold statements against the entire ways that the Jedi use the Force. Bane says this: "The Force is not fire. It cannot be passed from one user's lit torch to another's, and another's, until the entire hemisphere is illuminated with the blaze of a million light." Bane would go on to state that the Force is more akin to a venom, weak when diluted amongst the masses, but strong in a single individual. These exact words were the main driving force that led Bane into fulfilling his purpose and changing the galaxy with his radical take on the Sith. However, unlike many Jedi scholars that simply refuted these claims purely based on Jedi doctrine, Luke objected to it purely from a basis of personal experience. Out of this quote, Luke writes this: "Bane was wrong. The Force is fire. When the Emperor held power, the Jedi were nearly extinguished, and the galaxy suffered. I have worked to restore the Jedi Order, and we grow stronger as we pass the flame. Our light spreads." Luke's perspective on the Force is an interesting one when you realize that Luke and Darth Bane are the mirror opposites of one another. Luke would know firsthand what it was like to be the only one embodying the Force for a short amount of time, because at this point, as far as he knew, by Return of the Jedi, he was the last Jedi alive. While nowadays we know that beings such as Ahsoka, Ezra, and other Jedi were alive, Luke was really the only Jedi that was actually making headway on rebuilding the Order. Luke was the final torch, and he was in that position of being the sole focus of the Force. In Legends, Luke would do his best to teach Leia, but for the first few years, she would be far too tied up with politics of starting a new republic and dealing with the Thrawn threat than to focus on Luke's Jedi training. Luke Skywalker and Darth Bane are the exact same, but on the diametrically opposed sides of the Force. Both Luke and Bane were the last of their order to their knowledge, and both of them experienced firsthand what it was like to have to rebuild their order from nothing. Obviously though, they had two distinctly different circumstances, as Bane was the author of the Sith Order's destruction, whereas Luke simply had the final torch passed on to him. Nevertheless, they both found themselves in the exact same situation, which gives Luke equal rights to oppose the claims made by Darth Bane. He further states in the passage that the light grew stronger with the Jedi Order growing as a result. He felt that as he built up the Jedi through love and compassion, that all beings in the galaxy, including the Jedi, grew stronger. Luke's strong beliefs in the power of love and compassion come from a place of conviction that can only originate from personal experience. It was love and compassion that stoked the conflict within his father, Darth Vader, and achieved the impossible, turning a diehard Sith back to the light. Everyone who came against Vader ultimately condemned him, except for Luke. Obi-Wan and every Jedi left from Order 66 just continued to bash Vader for what he had done, and only sought to destroy him. Ahsoka did her best to stick with Anakin, but as George Lucas stated, only Luke could have brought Vader back. Luke's existence as his son punctured Vader's belief that he had been responsible for the death of Padme. Luke was living proof that Padme's spirit lived on, and was bringing him back to their family. Luke knew this, and took full advantage of it on the second Death Star. despite being in the very pit of the beast with the Dark Lord Darth Sidious, exuding as much of his dark power as he had. Vader's personal conflict was being goaded by Luke's unshakable trust in him to make the right decision. As we all know, this would turn out to be fruitful, as Luke was proven to be right, and Vader turned back to the light. Luke knew the power of love and compassion, and would not throw it away for anything, at least in Star Wars Legends. Another interesting thing to point out is that Luke, despite his beliefs of the Rule of Two and the fact that it did work, hated it, obviously. This was helped in part by the fact that the dark side was so quiet for so many millennia due to the small amount of Sith and the blinding arrogance of the Jedi. However, Luke never said that the Rule of Two was ineffective. He just said that it was wrong. Later in this chapter, when Darth Bane goes into his vision of the plan of the Sith hiding and then taking their revenge, Luke again comments and says this: "This tendency of the Sith to hide worries me. There may be threats out there that we haven't encountered yet." This says to us that Luke recognizes the Sith threat and knows how effective hiding and striking from the shadows is. I believe he doesn't refute the craftiness of the dark side, but Luke simply objects to the notion that the Force is stronger in a single individual. I heard it once stated by someone that Darth Bane's philosophy of the Force came from a place of growing up in lack. As a child, Darth Bane was stuck on a mining planet called Patros, where he grew up with an abusive, alcoholic father. The whole reason they were stuck there was because of the Outer Rim or Works Company, or Oro for short. The skinny of it is that Oro would give out loans to desperate people, and then raise the interest on the loans so high that it was basically impossible to pay off. So the desperate souls had to work in their minds to pay off this ever-accumulating debt. But as the interest rises, so does the bill of anything that the workers do on Patros, whether drinking, eating, or even their living expenses. All of it just piled onto the debt that they owed. Therefore, many people never got out of this debt and ultimately gave up, dying in service to the Oro Company. The real problem was when they died, the debt would go on to their children, who would have to work it off instead. Hence, why Bane's father just drank his life away and abused his son, intending to leave his debt entirely to Bane. I say it all to say this: Bane grew up knowing how things worked on Patros. Nothing was ever free, and everything came at a price. He was poor, overworked, living in squalor, and shunned by every other miner there. He grew up knowing lack. So when he was introduced to this idea of an all-powerful, all-encompassing energy that penetrates through the galaxy, naturally, he didn't believe that the Force was an infinite well of power. He just knew that it was a precious commodity. Therefore, he was afraid of losing it, letting it be diluted by others and taken away from him. Hence, his creation of the Rule of Two. His ideology was heavily flawed, but his battle plan did end up working in the end. This wouldn't be the last time that Luke disagrees with Darth Bane, as later in the chapter, he makes several comments about Bane's approach to lightsaber combat, even going so far as to imply that the Sith were weaker lightsaber duelists than the Jedi. When Bane claimed that emotion, not peace, would lead one to victory, Luke would go on to say that unless a Sith could overwhelm their opponents immediately, most Sith would eventually lose in the confines of a duel. He would also state that without peace, you can't keep your mind clear and forget your techniques. Throughout this whole chapter, Luke continuously refutes many of Bane's teachings, and he goes more into how he feels about how the dark side is used, and goes on to state that he dislikes that the Sith only ever seem to look at the negative implications of many Force abilities. Towards the end of this chapter, Bane is lifting off some dark side Force abilities as well as their drawbacks. At the bottom, Luke gives his final thoughts where he states this: Sith tactics do as much harm to the user as they do to the victim. The dark side corrupts everything that it touches. It's hard for me to understand why people who know this choose this path anyway. In conclusion, Luke's views on Darth Bane and his teachings are overall extremely negative, and it's probably safe to say that Luke absolutely hated the way Darth Bane used and taught the Force, not to mention likely hated the man himself. I think it's very interesting, and definitely very special to see these two characters, who lived 1,000 years apart from one another, be able to interact in some way. But my friends, what do you think of Luke's assessment of Darth Bane? And do you agree with him? Do you think the Force is fire, or is it venom? Comment down below which way and which method you think, and why. And as always, may the Force be with you, and have a great day.